Merry Christmas on my lead up to the big day. And another of my monologues. And I want to read you something today. I've been sent this rather interesting book. I'll tell you about the book a bit later on when I finished reading it. But there was something in this. They quote somebody else. And it's just so fascinating that I really had to share it with you. And I'd love to hear your comments on this. So here's an excerpt from something called The Party System by Hare Belloc and Cecil Chesterton. And it was written originally and published in 1911. And I just want to read 3 paragraphs on it. Now, it's a bit in old-fashioned language, so I just bear with some of that. I'll try and interpret for those of you who perhaps get a little bit lost. But this is about the government and about the party system and about democracy. And I want to know whether you think that what they were talking about over 100 years ago is relevant today as it was back then. So here we go. Let's just have a look. And it starts off on page, hang on, I'm on the wrong page. It's better. There we are. It starts off like this. The authors state, it may be worthwhile to define exactly what democracy is. Votes and elections and representative assemblies are not democracy. They are, at the very best, machinery for carrying out democracy. Democracy is government by the general will. Under whatever forms, such laws as the masses of the people desire are passed, and such laws that they dislike are rejected, then there is democracy. Wherever, under whatever forms, the laws passed and rejected that have no relation to the desires of the masses, then that's not democracy. That is to say, there is no democracy in England today. Pure democracy is possible only in small communities. The only machinery which perfectly fulfills the idea is the meeting of the elders under the village tree to debate and decide its own concerns. The size of modern communities and the complexity of modern political and economic problems make such arrangements impossible for us. But it is well to keep it in mind as a picture of real democracy. The idea of representation, in other words, MPs, is to secure by an indirect method the same result as is secured directly as in those smaller communities. It is essential that the representatives should represent. The extraordinary capacity of politicians for tying themselves in inextricable knots of confused thinking was never shown better than in the current saying that a representative should not be a mere delegate. Well, of course they shouldn't be a mere delegate, should they? A delegate of the government. Either the representative must vote as his constituents would vote if consulted, or he must vote in the opposite sense. And in the latter case, he is not a representative at all, but merely an oligarch. If, on the other hand, he does vote as his constituents would vote, then he is merely the mouthpiece of his constituents and derives his authority from them. And this is the only democratic theory of representation. So in other words, if the people tell their MPs, this is what we want, the MPs should vote on that and not on anything else and tell the government this is what the people want. They shouldn't tell them anything else because they're supposed to be representing the government. Well, that's bloody obvious, isn't it? But is that what we've got? So, second paragraph. In order that the practice may correspond to it, even approximately, 3 things are necessary. First, there should be absolute freedom in the selection of the representatives. Second, these representatives must be strictly responsible to their constituents and to no one else. And third, the representatives must deliberate in perfect freedom and especially must be absolutely independent of the executive, i.e. the government. They should not be told what to think and what to do. But wait, that does seem like that's not happening these days. So, in a true representative system, the executive, i.e. the government, would be responsible to the elected assembly, the MPs, and the elected assembly would be responsible to the people. From the people come the impulse and the initiative. They would make certain demands, and it would be the duty of the representatives to give expression to these demands and of the executive to carry them out. Well, it must be obvious to everybody that these conditions do not prevail in England today. Instead, the executive being controlled by the instead of the executive being controlled by the representative assembly, it controls them. And instead of the demands of the people being expressed for them by their representatives, the matters discussed by the representatives are not settled by the people, not even by themselves, but by the ministry, the very body which it is the business of the representative assembly to check and control. The electors do not, as a fact, control the representatives, and the representatives do not, as a fact, control the government. And in that case, something alien has intervened between the electors and the elected, between legislature, can't even say it, and the executive. Something that defects the working of the representative institutions. In other words, the thing that this is that's in the way and interrupting this is called the party system. So what that is saying is, of course, that we, the people, should be telling our MPs what we want. The MPs should be telling the government to go and do it, and not the other way round. But it does seem, does it not? I mean, it seems like it to me, that the government are coming up with the policies and telling the representatives that's what you're having, go and tell the people. It's the wrong way round. One more paragraph. Listen to this. Belloc and Chesterton further comment, there is a section of the public, perhaps not large, but certainly increasing, which is beginning to be uneasy about the party system. Bear in mind, this was 100 years ago. It is natural for men and women to wish to have a voice in their government of their native land, and many are beginning to feel that there is no such effective voice today. Laws which they detest are passed, and passed easily by the consent of both parties, and they're powerless to defeat or even protest against them. Measures which they ardently desire, and which they know most of their neighbours ardently desire, are never even mentioned. Acts of the government which seem at the very least proper subjects for criticism and inquiry are suffered without comment. Scandals and blunders of which they have been caught a glimpse are suddenly covered over and buried in silence. And, along with the discontent engendered by these things, goes an intangible suspicion that they are in some way, the people that is, in some way are victims of a conspiracy. And there it is. So what that last bit is saying is that we have it the reverse way round, that the executive, the government are passing policies which are detested by the people, and the MPs are just bringing them on and saying, well, this is what you've got, and the people are suffering. And the things that the people actually know that they want, and they know their neighbours want, and they mention it to their MPs, are not even being discussed at government level. So it's the wrong way around. Now, I know this. I know this is happening because I've had members of my viewers, or my viewers have sent in copies of letters to their MPs on all sorts of issues, like the energy bill, like the medical intervention, like trying to get them to go to certain meetings, to say, we would like you to go to a certain meeting that, say, Andrew Bridgen is calling in Parliament to talk about certain people dropping down, you know from what, and these MPs, who are supposed to be our representatives, are going, no, I'm far too busy, I'm doing other things, I'm doing my constituency work, I'm doing all this, I'm not doing it. And yet, it's completely the wrong way round. I mean, it is absolutely madness. And somehow, we the people who put these people in power, are just acquiescing and going, oh, well, that's that then. And yet, as a result of this, we have a whole series. Am I the only one? We have a whole series of mad policies that the government, the executive, are saying things like net zero. Oh yes, CO2, it's a terrible thing. And he's persuading everybody that we're going to have it because it's for your own good. Or we're going to come along and take your wood burning stove away. Or everybody's got to go on electric. Or everybody's got to have a digital ID so that we can snoop and surveil on you at whatever you do. Or there's cameras all over the place. Or you've got to have 5G radiating you that we've never asked for. The executive is in the wrong position. The executive should be down at the bottom of the pile, that we the people are going, these are the things we want and these are the things we don't want. We tell our MPs and they are then powered to go to the government and say, this is the demands of the people who are paying your wages. Now go and do what they say. And yet, the party system with the Conservatives and the Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens and all the others are all acquiescing to this theatre that it pretends to be a democratic society, but of course it is no such thing. And this is something that, in my humble opinion, and clearly Herr Belloc and Cecil Chesterton thinks is absolutely abhorrent and has got to change. And it hasn't changed for over 100 years, but it's got to change going into the future, because we can't be run not in a democratic way, but by what seems clearly obvious to everybody, by a tyrannical and dictatorial system. And it's got to stop.